Now, if you go for that same ride and you just feel like that front end is just way too divey, or you're just bottoming out, or there's just not that support that you want, here's a couple of tips to help you diagnose that. What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the channel. Hopefully you guys are having an amazing day. And in this video series, we're gonna go over some tips on how to set up your suspension. So for those of you that don't know, we do ride for DVO suspension. So we hang out with those guys a ton. DVO is a strong supporter of this channel, and they also take care of you guys, the viewers. So if you guys are ever in the market for suspension, be sure to call them and let them know that you're a friend of the channel. Those guys are amazing, top-notch customer service as well as support. And those guys really do try to make sure that everyone is just having an amazing experience on their green or blue or black suspension. It does come in different colors, but yeah, definitely consider giving those a call. We've been seeing a lot of comments recently about tips on setting up suspension, so we figured why not do a little video series about this. Now, if you don't run DVO suspension, don't worry. A lot of this is actually going to apply to a lot of suspension out there. There's some common terminologies like how to set up compression and rebound and sag and air pressure. So yeah, by the end of this video, you guys should feel a lot more confident about setting up your suspension. I know suspension can be a little bit more of an overwhelming concept for a lot of riders out there, so hopefully you guys enjoy this video. So before we get into the video, the two things that you guys will need, number one is a shock pump, and number two is a multi-tool for the first part. This video, we're just gonna be setting up the fork. In the next video, we're gonna be setting up the rear shock. You're gonna need one extra tool, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Okay, let's get into the video on how to set up your fork. Now, I'm gonna try to break this down as simply as I can with the different terminology. With the DVO Diamond, you have a few different settings you can adjust. The first thing is gonna be the air pressure. The second thing is gonna be the OTT, or the off the top. The third thing is gonna be high speed compression adjustment. What number am I on?
4.
The fourth thing is going to be low speed compression adjustment, and the fifth is going to be the rebound. Now, working with all 5 of these, you have a lot of tunability. Yes, it can be intimidating, but we're going to simplify it a little bit and make it a little bit easier for you guys to understand and work through this step by step. So the first thing you're going to do is go to the description of this video, or you guys can go to DVO's website, and I want you guys to go to their fork setup guide. So on DVO's website, you should have a couple of charts, and those are going to be the recommended off the top settings. Now, off the top, that's basically this knob down on the left side of the fork. And what off the top does is it changes how the initial portion of travel on your fork is gonna feel, essentially how much effort it takes to compress it. Now, a lot of people think that this is an unlimited range adjustment because basically there's a lot of clicks. That's not true. There is gonna be a specific zone that you're gonna wanna be in based off your weight, and that's gonna be the recommended off the top setting. Now, you can play around with it from there. Normally it's like 1 or 2 clicks. And when I say click, I don't mean little clicks as you turn those Allen wrenches. A full rotation, that's how you're gonna be adjusting the off the top. It's gonna be 1 full rotation, that's gonna be 1 additional off the top. So that's how we're gonna adjust it, and that's gonna take care of that initial part of travel. Now, you might be wondering, why is off the top necessary? That's what separates the DVO forks from other forks out there, is it allows someone like Hannah, who's a lot lighter than me, and also me, to run the same fork, but tune them differently. So I'm probably gonna need a little bit more air pressure, but if I pump up the air pressure, the initial stroke would normally be a little on the stiffer side. The off the top allows me to adjust for that, and then I get a more softer initial stroke, but I get the support from the rest of the stroke that I'm looking for. So that's the cool thing with off the top. Now, before we make the adjustment based off of what our weight is, what we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna want to let all the air out of the fork. All right, so now that we've already let all the air out, we've made our off the top adjustments. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna air this bad boy, or girl, depending on whatever you prefer to call your fork. We're gonna air this fork up, and we're gonna figure out what our air pressure is. Now, once again, on DVO's website, you can find a recommended PSI chart. Now, to figure out if that recommending setting was okay, the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna check our sag. Now, sag is how much the suspension is going to basically sink into its travel while you're standing weighted as if you were going on a downhill. You want to be close to, it's a very debatable subject, but I would say anywhere from 20 to 30%. Me personally, I like my stuff right around 25% sag. Now, the way we're going to do this is we're basically going to get on the bike, we're going to compress the fork a couple of times, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to move the O-ring, and we're going to basically lower the O-ring all the way down, and then we're going to weight the fork as if we were going on a downhill, and then we're going to slowly come off the bike. Now, like I said, you want to be right around 20 to 30%. So you want to measure that space that it sagged down with the total amount of travel in this fork, and you want to try to figure out how's your sag looking. All right, so now that we have both OTT and our air pressure already set up and dialed in, the next setting we're going to play around with is going to be compression. Now, compression is really awesome. Basically, your compression settings, both your low speed and your high speed, are going to have a lot to do with how much force it takes on your suspension to essentially use it or activate it. Low speed compression is essentially going to be that initial stroke. So think about it as if you're going down a trail at high speed and you have all that small bump chatter. A lot of that is going to be your low speed compression adjustment. And the way you're going to adjust your low speed is going to be this little knob at the top that essentially kind of looks like a lever. And on most forks, I believe you get 6 low speed compression adjustments. If you guys go all the way to the 6, it's going to feel almost like a lockout. And if you go all the way to the 1, it's going to feel way softer and way easier to compress as you put a little bit of force on that fork. Now, high speed compression, think bigger hits. So say you take a big rock roll or a big huck and you compress your suspension really hard and rapidly. Now that's going to be affecting, like I said, the high speed compression, and you have a few more range of clicks on this. So high speed compression is essentially the black knob under the green lever up top. Now, the way you want to set up your high speed compression is the first thing you want to do is you want to back it all the way off. So essentially all the way to the negative. So we're going to move it all the way there. Now, one thing to keep in mind with high-speed compression is similar to OTT, one full rotation of the high-speed compression is going to be one additional high-speed compression. So think about it in terms of full rotation. So if you're going to make an adjustments, we're not doing micro adjustments, we're doing full rotations here. All right, and one last adjustment we can make to the fork is actually going to be the rebound. Now, rebound is essentially how fast your suspension is coming back after you compress it. This is a completely personal topic. Everyone has like their preference for a rebound. Me personally, I used to like my rebound a lot more on the slower side. Recently, I would say like the last 2 years, I've actually liked it a little on the faster side. And it also depends on where I'm going. There might be certain terrain like Phoenix, which is a lot more like fast chunk, where I might run my stuff a little on the faster side, just to kind of keep up with the trail. And then there might be like places like Sedona, where I feel like it's more slower, big hits. And there I might run my stuff a little on the slower side, just so I don't feel like I'm just getting bucked every time I hit one of those steeper rolls. It really is condition dependent. For rebound, you'll see on the fork leg, it's the right leg. There's 2, it's a negative and a positive, but they also will label it fast and slow on DVO. Can't say the same for other suspension out there. I think they'll just keep it as plus and minus. But a trick that I use the negative means fast. So if I go all the way to the negative side, it's basically as fast as I can. And then the plus means I'm adding rebound. And that's how I remember it. Everyone has their own tricks. But what I would recommend for you guys to do is I would actually recommend going right in the middle. That's a really good starting point. If you go on the trail and you feel like your suspension is just way too fast and like it's out of control, slow it down a little bit. So maybe turn it a couple of clicks towards the positive side. If you feel like it's not fast enough, like you don't feel like the suspension is essentially keeping up with the trail, so as you hit a bump, by the time you get to the next bump, you don't feel like your suspension has come all the way up, then speed it up a little bit. So go towards the minus a couple of clicks. But yeah, that is a really cool adjustment that you can make to your fork. Now, in terms of troubleshooting your suspension settings, this is going to be something that now that we've had all of our adjustments made, we've set up our OTT, we've set up our air pressure, we have our low speed and our high speed compression to where we think we're going to like it, and then we also have our rebound adjusted. You're going to go out on the trails, and this is going to be the important part. Now, the first thing I want you to do before you do anything is I want you guys to write down what your current settings are after you have the initial setup, because this is going to be our start starting place. It's always good to have a starting reference, because say you go out on the trail and you start messing with things and then you just make it worse, and then it just gets worse, and then you're basically digging yourself into a hole that you can't get out of. It's always nice to go look on a piece of paper and see what your original settings were, and that way you can always go back to that for reference. Now, the first thing that I'll do when I get on the trail is I'll actually lower my O-ring, because this is going to give me a good idea about how much travel I'm using. A couple of situations you might encounter. You might lower your O-ring and you might go out on the trail, and like I said, your suspension might start feeling really harsh. Like you feel like that front end, it doesn't feel plush, it doesn't feel supple, you don't feel like the front end is tracking to the trail. Now, here are a couple of common scenarios that you might find yourself in. So the first one is you might have too much air in your fork. So if you set up your sag and you were running 20% sag because you thought you need a lot of support, maybe try letting out just a little bit of air, and start with 5 psi increments. So let out 5 psi and then go do the same section of trail. Don't make too many other adjustments right off the get-go, because if you make too many other adjustments, it's going to be hard to isolate what it was, whether it was your air pressure or your compression. But that's one good thing to realize. Say your sag was actually perfect and you look at the O-ring after your run and you're actually using quite a bit of travel, so that's not what's causing the harshness. The next thing to consider is going to be your low speed compression. So I want you to look at that lever and see what number is it on. If you have it set at like 3 or 4 or 5, try going down 1 or 2 clicks and see if making it a little bit softer off the top is actually going to help out with this harsh feeling. Now, say you go for the same run and you lowered it, it's starting to feel better, your PSI feels solid, that feels better, but there's just something about it. You're not getting that responsiveness that you want from this bike. The next thing that I see a lot of people might end up finding out is their rebound might actually be a little too slow. Sometimes when your suspension is feeling a little harsh, that just might mean that your suspension doesn't have enough time to basically go back to full extension before hitting the next bump. And that's a good indication that your suspension is a little too slow. So what I want you to do is I want you to speed up your rebound just a tad. So go to that negative side, maybe 2 to 3 clicks. And what this is going to allow it to do is it's going to allow your suspension to kind of come back to full travel before that next bump, and you're actually going to have suspension that's reacting to the trail, as opposed to suspension that's packing up, essentially compressing on that first bump, and then by the time you get to the next bump, if it hasn't fully come back to its original travel, then it's just packing in there and you're not actually using that full travel, and that could add to that harsh feeling. So those are 3 common situations that I tend to find in the fork for when your fork is feeling harsh. Now, if you go for that same ride and you just feel like that front end is just way too divey, or you're just bottoming out, or there's just not that support that you want, here's a couple of tips to help you diagnose that. Now, the first thing we're going to look at is that sag. So like I said, we're going to check our sag. Now, if you look at your sag and you're running like around 30% and you just feel like you're blowing through the travel, maybe you're just a really aggressive rider, or you're riding terrain that just has a lot of G-outs. It might be time to put a little bit of air inside that fork. So once again, I want you to add about 5 psi to that air chamber, and then I want you to go for the same lap and see, do you feel like you got a little bit more support there? Now, if you're still not happy from that, what I want you to do is I want you to play around with the high speed compression. So I want you to add a couple of full rotations of high speed compression to the fork. What that's going to allow you to do, it's allow you to get a little bit more bottom out support, and it'll help limit how much travel you're going through on those bigger hits. Now, if you go for the same ride and you feel like, man, like it's starting to get better, but it's not fully there, you still feel like you're going through that travel, or maybe the fork is feeling a little on the divier side, but you feel like the air pressure is set up to where you like it, and you feel like high speed compression is at where you like it, you don't think you want too much more support on that bottom out portion, the next thing I would recommend is take a look at that rebound. So if you live somewhere where maybe you have a lot of super steep rock rolls or slow chunk, and that's where you're experiencing that diviness, maybe it's time to play around with your rebound here. And what I would recommend doing for this is I would actually recommend on hits where you feel like your fork is diving too fast, maybe slow down your rebound just a tad, a couple of clicks here. And what this will allow your suspension to do, it'll actually allow it to soak up that hit a little bit more controlled rather than kind of getting that diving forward and then popping back up right away. And now those 3 little tips right there, those normally are very helpful for me when I am tuning my suspension, and I hope that they'll help you guys too. So those are 3 tips on if your suspension is feeling too harsh or if your fork was feeling a little too soft. So rad, you guys, hopefully you guys found a couple of those tips informative on how to set up your fork. Like I said, this is a 2-part video, so stay tuned for the second part, which basically be how to set up your rear shock. If you guys have any questions at all, don't hesitate to leave them in the comment section, or if you're running DVO suspension, don't hesitate to call those guys up, because those guys, customer service is their top priority, which is why we really recommend, if you're in the market for your next suspension, consider hitting those guys up, because time and time again, they have proven to go above and beyond when it comes to customer service in regards to suspension, and they also take care of you guys, viewers of the Awesome MTB channel. So yeah, definitely give those guys a call, and if you have any other questions, leave them in the comment section or hit that like button if you guys did find this video informative. And until next time, you guys, ride awesome. You.